Good evening. I'm Councillor Sayal Raza, the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's now 7 p.m. and so I'd like to welcome you all to this evening of the committee. Members of the committee who are here this evening, guests from NHS and other members who are present, as well as council officers who will be assisting members throughout the meeting. In addition, I would like to welcome members of the public and everybody at home as well. Today we have two substantial issues before the committee: the impact of changes to acute mental health beds on local mental health services and the council budget for 2023-2024. We also have updates from scrutiny panel chairs from Councillor Sharma as a council representative for North West London Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and our regular review of work programme and urgent business. It might be helpful to guests and to committee if I set out this evening's meeting will work. As chair, I'll be running the meeting and inviting people to speak. I will allow every member of the committee who wishes to speak the opportunity to speak, so I would ask members to wait their turn and not interrupt people when they are talking, or comment on contributions or other except during their own statements. As always, we will treat our guests with courtesy, and whilst the issues before us today are important topics with real world impact, we will ensure our questions and debate are measured and constructive. We are here to express our opinions on the merits and otherwise of the agenda items before us and try to come to a collective view, or failing that, the majority view. I intend to use the following procedure. I shall invite the relevant member, or where relevant, the officer, to introduce the report. I will invite members of the committee to ask questions of that member or officer. I shall then invite members to express their views as part of the debate on the report. I would like to remind members that I shall give everyone who wishes to speak the chance to do so, but in accordance to the council rules of debate, you will only be allowed to speak once at the discussion stage. If you hear something said by someone else that you dislike or disagree with, you do not have the right to comment after they have spoken or interrupt them. Please say everything you wish to say in your allocated time, which will be up to 5 minutes each. I, or Councillor Foot, my Vice Chair, shall then speak last and then briefly to sum up the discussion and advise of any issues or common ground to note. We have a great deal to cover this evening, so please be mindful of your fellow committee members and our guests to ensure your contributions are to the point. Agenda item number 1. So apologies for absence or declaration of interests. I do have Councillor Rajwat for agenda item number 4. Any other absence?
Some of the cabinet members also have sent apologies. So Councillor Shaheen, Councillor Bath, and Councillor Chowdhury, as in addition to Councillor Rajwat as well. And one more, Councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Kenzie. Any others? No. Thank you. Any declaration of interest? No, thank you. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 2. So this is minutes of the meeting in your agenda packs from September and November, from pages 6 to 24. Are we in agreement that the meetings are correct? Yeah. Yes, councillors.
Small correction in meeting of 1st September on page number 8, where I had mentioned about ethnic groups, not ethic groups.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll note that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There are some items which haven't been picked up, and in particular, I haven't had a reply from Councillor Rajwat on the ratio of highest to lowest salaries. He said he was going to send it separately from the meeting. Nothing's come. And there are other points which haven't been followed up, but they're for you, I think, to take up.
Oh, it's noted. Any other point?
just those which I'm sure you'll see they're there to be actioned and haven't been actioned yet.
The actions haven't been actioned. Thank you for that. But according to the meeting, the actual minutes, they're all okay.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Everybody agreed. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's all fine. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 3. So this is acute mental health beds, West London NHS Trust. So I'm just going to read out a bit of brief. Here we go. Okay. So the first substantial item tonight looks at mental health provisions locally and the proposed changes into to inpatient services. Good scrutiny doesn't just focus on what the council does, it also considers wider activity, including activity in the health sector. During this municipal year, we have already heard from Hounslow and Richmond Community Healthcare Trust. We're engaging again with our health partners today, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Christopher Hilton from West London NHS Trust, who will provide the committee with a report on plans to change mental health service provision across Hounslow, Ealing and Hammersmith and Fulham. West London NHS Trust provides inpatient mental health care to adults. Since the pandemic, there has been no mental health provision in wards at St Bernard's in Ealing, a temporary situation that has now become the Trust's preferred position. Since the autumn, the Trust has been engaging with residents across Ealing, Hammersmith and Fulham and Hounslow to get their opinions on the change of approach. Today is the chance for OSC to comment both on the proposals and the wider issues the approach draws out. Christopher, may I ask you to introduce the report? You have 5 minutes, please. Oh, and Joe as well. Yeah, between the both of you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So my role is the Chief Operating Officer for Local Services at West London Trust, and I'm a psychiatrist by background, and I'm joined by Joe Manley, who's one of my deputies from the Trust. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you, and I'll take the report as read, but will just draw out a few contextual issues that may be helpful for the committee. For many years, West London Trust has operated our inpatient bed base on a 3-borough basis. So in order to manage the flows of patients requiring an emergency or crisis admission, we have operated within what's known as our natural clinical flow. So patients will always be admitted as close to home as possible, but within the footprint of the Trust, that is Ealing, Hounslow and Hammersmith and Fulham. We have 3 main sites for our local services. They are at St Bernard's Hospital in Ealing, and that is the old pre-Victorian building dating back to 1831 that some of you may be familiar with. There is material on the Trust website that gives illustrations. We also have Lakeside, which is the much more modern mental health unit adjacent to West Middlesex Hospital. And we have the Hammersmith and Fulham mental health unit, which is next to Charing Cross in Hammersmith and Fulham. For a number of years, we've been concerned about the facilities available at St Bernard's Hospital, and the Wolsey Wing in particular was some wards and beds for adults of working age that the CQC heavily criticised us for and said they were no longer fit for delivering modern mental health care. They were also described in the Health Service Journal as some of the worst estates in the NHS in London. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we took the decision for 2 reasons to suspend 31 beds in Ealing. And there were 2 reasons for that. One was to manage staffing safely. We had a number of staff off sick at the time, and we needed to make sure that the wards that we were operating were safe. We were also unable to safely manage some of the infection prevention and control requirements of the pandemic in those Victorian settings, on the Ealing site in particular. In order to mitigate the loss of 31 beds, we were able to open 18 beds in the Lakeside site in a ward known as Robin Ward, leaving a net difference of 13 beds. The Trust has since, well, for a number of years actually, the Trust has been almost unique in not requiring out-of-area placements for adults for our population. And that is something which we are very keen to maintain, because we are very committed to having care as close to home and within the natural clinical flow of the trust. However, we are seeking to engage with local residents and communities to make permanent the beds that have been suspended now for 3 years. And I just wanted to highlight 2 or 3 points in the time remaining available to me. This is not a cost-saving exercise. No costs are saved to the trust as a result of this, and all of the money, that the revenue implications of suspending those beds has been reinvested, and the details are in the paper. The second thing is, naturally, there's been concern to the residents of Ealing. Our equality impact assessments have been presented to Ealing Scrutiny and to the Health and Wellbeing Board in Ealing. The result is that there will be no acute adult beds in the borough of Ealing, and that Ealing residents, when requiring a crisis admission, will be admitted to other trust premises, Lakeside or Charing Cross. We do have other beds in Ealing, including our crisis house, which is accessed by Ealing and Hounslow and Hammersmith residents. And our dementia beds happen to be in Ealing for all 3 boroughs. So it's not in any way a question of our commitment to the resident population of the Ealing borough. And clearly, for this committee, there is interest in the impact on residents of Hounslow. We have looked to see whether Ealing patients being admitted to Lakeside unit has had a negative impact. In the year following the suspension, it remains the case that the majority of Hounslow residents are still admitted in Lakeside. It is our largest mental health unit. And I'd be very happy to answer further questions, which I know the committee seeks to inquire about the other implications for local residents here.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher. So we now move to the question side of things. So I will now give the opportunity to all committee members. If I could just start with Councillor Cameron, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, how much have been saved by mothballing since 2020, and how that money has been utilized? Did that money goes in health and social care or somewhere else? Thank you.
Thank you. And I draw your attention to what I think is on page 30 of your pack, which under section 5 of the report, we've highlighted that all of the revenue implications of this change has been entirely reinvested into services for supporting crisis healthcare for individuals in the mental health system. And in fact, you can see that the revenue consequences on a recurrent basis are actually slightly more expensive for us. And most of that is because we have identified some concerns from residents about seeking some support for travel between the boroughs if they are admitted out of area. So the types of things that we've reinvested the money in are listed there, but just to itemize them, we've closed 31 beds or suspended 31 beds and immediately reopened 18. So that is the cost of Robin Ward. We've added permanent staffing to our health-based place of safety. That's where the police bring individuals in a mental health crisis. Historically, if the police turned up at the mental health unit at Lakeside, we would ask nursing staff to come off the ward to support the management of the crisis patient. As a result of releasing the savings, we've spent £820,000 having continuous staffing model to support the crisis pathway at the front door, including in the Lakeside mental health unit. We've put some additional investment into our crisis single point of access. And we've also invested recurrently in what's called step-down capacity. That's work that we are doing very closely with the local authority, and particularly in Hounslow with Tony Camp's team, to identify more homely settings for patients when they are nearing discharge. And that's a recurrent investment there. And then finally, there was an allocation made to support travel costs in the long-term plan. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that. Councillor Foot, please.
Right. Does the current post-2020 approach disincentivize timely transfer from acute to community services? Is Hounslow disadvantaged by virtue of its ability to bring people out of acute services more quickly?
Thank you, Councillor Foot. I would say, in response to the first part of your question, on the contrary, I think that the work that we've done within the trust seeks to support more so timely discharge of individuals as soon as they are clinically fit for discharge, to move them into a more appropriate setting. We've got a number of examples of how we're doing that, including through the step-down provision that I've described. And you'll also see in the pack that in addition to the investment from this, we've made additional contributions, including through the place-based partnership here in Hounslow, to work with local authority colleagues in procuring step-down provision to enable that timely discharge. We're doing the same in Ealing and in Hammersmith and Fulham. We're also working we have a crisis house known as Amadeus House in the Borough of Ealing, and we support the movement of patients there. And we have an extremely assertive crisis assessment and treatment team and a reablement service that support individuals to return home when it's safe to do so. The second part of your question, Councillor Foot, was about the impact of this on Hounslow. And I wanted to acknowledge to this committee that I think that one of the things that I discussed with the local authority, Stephen Forbes and Martin Waddington and colleagues, and with the Chief Executive, have been the different experiences we have of flow for individuals from the three boroughs that we support. And I think it's fair to say that we have the most effective clinical flow supporting patients to return home when it's safe and appropriate in the Borough of Hounslow. And that's mirrored in the data that looks at our length of stay and a number of other metrics. There are differences in the other two boroughs. One of the things that we've committed to and that we're very keen to do is to work with the three local authorities to learn best practice from the partnership work that we have here in Hounslow, to see if we can achieve the very low levels of delayed transfers for Ealing and Hammersmith patients that we do with Hounslow patients. One final point just to add to that is we recognise that moving Ealing patients out of borough into a neighbouring borough for their inpatient admission risks, in theory, making it more complex to discharge them. And we have taken that into account through some of the work that we do with Ealing Local Authority to try and mitigate that delay.
Thank you for that. Question 4. Who would like to take this question? Yeah, Councillor Kiani, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask, do you expect staff reduction as a consequence of reducing activities?
Overall, a staff reduction. So I suppose it's true to say that we are going to be supporting 13 fewer beds with the preferred outcome. What is also true to say is that we have had a historically high vacancy rate in a number of the services, particularly in the Wolsey wing, which we found very hard to encourage staff to work in and to retain. So we are certainly not expecting any redundancies as a result of this process. The staff have been moved on an interim basis to support the alternative services, and that has reduced our vacancy factor across our other services. And clearly, once we have a conclusion to the current engagement process, our desire would be to consult with those staff to make that change permanent for them. But we're certainly not expecting any redundancies as a result of this, and it should improve our vacancy position.
Thank you for that. Is there any other question to Christopher? Councillor Biddulph, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I may have misunderstood it, but the paper reads very much as if you're still under review, still looking at things and engaging in engagement. And whilst that always has to be continuous, and you take feedback from people who've been and that sort of thing, I was just wondering what the improvements are that you're still going to be making to the Robin Ward and when they will be implemented. What sort of things are you looking to do?
So in terms of the position that we're in at the moment, we are pursuing an enhanced engagement approach, which in conversation, particularly with the scrutiny panel chairs, Councillor Sharma was present, but also Councillor Crawford from Ealing and colleagues from Hammersmith and Fulham. We wanted to make sure that we had adequately engaged with the residents of neighbouring boroughs to Ealing. We feel that the impact is primarily on individuals from Ealing for obvious reasons, but we have conducted a number of additional events, etc. The engagement period ends in at the end of this month. That's the extended engagement period, and we anticipate collating the responses to the engagement, feedback from conversations like this one and a number of events that we've held across the three boroughs into a report for decision making in the weeks and months that follow, including a further conversation with the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee for North West London. In the meantime, to answer the other part of your question, the work that's going on in Robin Ward is, so we have refurbished Robin Ward for use as an acute ward. Slightly different pots of money doing this, so that's capital investment rather than the revenue implications that I've described here. We have invested capital on the Lakeside site to develop further the emergency and crisis assessment facilities at the front door of the unit, and we're currently developing that to enable people who are brought in crisis better to support children and young people, better support individuals with autistic spectrum disorders, and also to provide outdoor space for individuals whilst they're waiting with us in a crisis. In addition, we've recently made some changes to Robin Ward to enable us to support patients with very significant obesity challenges, bariatric patients in Robin Ward, which and to improve some of the infection prevention control requirements. All of that's capital investment from our buildings in the buildings, rather than the revenue changes that are described here on staffing and service delivery. Apologies, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I was really trying to find out whether some of it was pastoral care and some of it was clinical care and some of it was physical care, as it were. So just trying to get that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from the committee members? No. So thank you for that. So we do actually have just a little bit of a discussion with the committee members regards to the report. Is there anything that you find interesting or something we want to debate? Or is the report quite okay?
Just one question, when we are going to, 13 reduced beds, are we going to reuse them or that will be vanished?
If you're happy for me to answer, so we are at the moment we're keen not to be having inpatient facilities in those pre-Victorian buildings, because we've assessed that even with a major refurbishment costing upwards of £15 million, they still wouldn't meet the criteria that is now expected for a modern mental health unit. So it's certainly our position at the moment that once the wards are effectively mothballed currently, and I think the trust in the short to medium term would expect to use them for perhaps office space, staff space, potentially for decant purposes in the event of a major incident, rather than for routine use. And I think it's fair to say in the longer term, the trust would be looking to see whether the facilities may be disposed of, with the expectation that the costs or the capital receipts from that would be invested in other premises for health and care.
Yeah. So it means the residents will be disadvantaged due to that.
So I think that the questions that we've to answer completely openly, the conversations that I've had with Ealing residents have been around whether Ealing will be left in the long term with no adult acute inpatient beds in the borough, although they will still have access to beds for Ealing residents across our trust footprint. And it's certainly something that I'm very keen to point out, that the way we have managed our beds and our flow in the trust over the last 3 or 4 years, that has not resulted in us sending people to the Priory or out of area. I think evidences our ability to do that. Some of the data in the pack alludes to the work that we've tried to do to forecast whether, with growing mental health demand, we'll continue to be able to absorb this. You can see that from the latest weighted data, we're one of the highest bed bases of all of the mental health trusts in London. Even were we to have population growth across all 3 of our boroughs, as high as the highest of the last 10 years, we would still be above the median in the pack. So I think we are, with additional work, including the work that we're keen to do with the local authorities to support flow, we're keen to ensure that we maintain a local clinical flow offer for Ealing residents and that they are not disadvantaged for that reason.
Thank you. Councillor Sharma, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I've read the report in detail, and obviously we've had meetings with the JOSC, and I'm happy with the report.
Thank you, Councillor Sharma. Councillor Foot, please.
Yeah, I have to say that my grandmother was a patient at St Bernard's in the early 1960s, and the facilities were not good then. I don't know whether, in fact, that procedures have changed as well. So whether it was procedures or whether it was facilities or whether it was a mixture of both. But yeah, it certainly, I mean, I was a relatively young person and it certainly disturbed me.
Thank you for that, Councillor Foot. Is there any other sort of bits and pieces that we want to talk? We're happy with the report. You're happy with the report, everybody? Any other sort of discussions around the report?
Just to say that I think we should look at it again,
Yep.
let it drift to see how things are going and whether it's worked and as planned.
Yes. Would you be sort of updating the council?
I'd be very happy to do that. And in fact, it's one of the things that we've committed to do with the chairs of the scrutiny panels that we met with the JOSC meeting, is perhaps led by the Ealing, the relationships we have in Ealing, to look at the impact of these changes longer term, so that we can offer assurance to the panels that these have not had a long-term negative impact. And I'm very happy to come back on another occasion to talk about the work that we're hoping to do with the local authorities around length of stay, flow, and other aspects of the mental health space.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Chris. And Councillor Barron, please.
Chair, I should like to say that I know Councillor Sharma's been looking at this in huge detail. So if she says she's happy with it, then so am I.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm just going to pass now to Councillor Foot just to summarise the discussion that we've had today, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that yeah, it's been very wide, the reports that have come through, and I think a lot of worries are there. As I said, I had worries, but some of those go back a long time. But no, I think that what we're seeing is progress being made, and I think that we should accept the reports that's come through and move acceptance.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So just like to thank Joe as well as Chris first for attending. But yeah, this is a very good report. It's very positive. The great thing is that we're doing some really good work and making sure that Houser are sort of supporting that with the other 2 sort of boroughs. So I'm very, very happy with the report. So thank you both for being here. You may leave. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, That's great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to agenda item number 4. This is the 2023-24 council budget. We now move to the budget of our to the second of our substantial items tonight, the council's 2023-24 budget. When we met in November, the committee considered the council's medium-term financial strategy. The budget is the next step in that process and should support the delivery of the council's ambition, which Cabinet set out to us when OSC met in September of last year. The budget papers we have received set out seemingly exceptional sets of circumstances. December's Cabinet report stated that the combination of factors made for the worst financial outlook faced by the Council for many years, with more work to be done between then and formal budget settings this month. The report provided to the committee details activity to close a fund gap, as well as various funding announcements by central government in the provisional local government funding settlement. Excuse me. You will see from the committee papers that OSC is asked to note the key developments and changes since updating the One House of Financial Strategy in November, including the budget position for 2023-24, and provide comments in advance of the budget proposals being considered by Cabinet on the 21st of February 2023. I would like to welcome Councillor Catherine Dunn, Deputy Leader of the Council, to this meeting, and to thank her for talking to us about this important subject. Councillor Rajwat has sent his apologies. I see Rupa Ragwani, the Council's Director of Finance and Procurement, is also here today. Thank you. Hello. Supporting Councillor Dunn, welcome. I also see that Councillor Dunn has brought some Cabinet too. As a committee, we previously found the contributions to other portfolio holders helpful to our discussions. So I would like to extend a warm welcome to our other guests as well. It may well be the case that we can draw on other Cabinet members' perspectives. If this is the case, and for the benefit of those who are watching this meeting online, can I ask that you introduce yourselves before making your contribution? For now, though, Councillor Dunn, may I ask you to introduce the report? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I know you've received the report as a series of a slide pack in your packs, and hopefully everyone has had the opportunity to look at. So again, I will just kind of go through the key points from that. So as you've already said, Chair, in your introduction, when Councillor Rajwat was here in, I think it was November, he presented the very much worsened outlook, financial outlook that the council was facing at that point and is still facing due to the sort of incredible circumstances, the massive inflation and other pressures, due to a number of reasons, but also largely that followed the the incredibly disastrous mini budgets put forward by the government in September, which saw our budget gap increase massively at that stage. So the budget gap that we had identified back in November when Councillor Rajwat came to present to you was budget gap for this year, facing £23.9 million and facing a cumulative gap by 26-27 of £43 million. And I think it's slide 4 in the pack just shows the financial position snapshot, which really shows where that gap suddenly increased and came in. So we had been doing steadily decreasing that gap. By July 2022, it was at 13.8 million. And then by November, when we came here, that had gone up to 23.9 million for 23-24, with the cumulative gap jumping up from 22.8 million to 43 million. In terms of what's driving that gap, of course, that inflation impact that I've mentioned, which has affected everything that the council spends its money on. But also in terms of the impact that has had on pay. So, for example, we have an average 6% increase in pay compared with what we'd budgeted for, which was 2%. Contract inflations, on average 8% contractual inflations, and these are continuing to rise. We also obviously have the demand management, with demand for services very much high as well. In terms of housing, we have a very big temporary accommodation pressure, again, that we had been managing to get that under control, but that has become a very difficult pressure again. And of course, with everyone on the committee will be aware, with the numbers of asylum seekers that we that have come into the borough, and some of those are now contributing to that housing pressure as well. Also, obviously, adult social care and children's social care continue to be big pressures on the budget. In terms of looking to close that gap, that 23.9 million gap for 23-24, a series of activities have taken place by cabinet members and officers. So these have been included ongoing savings programs, but also additionally looking at short-term measures and changes that can be made, a review of fees and charges, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a bit more detail. Reviews undertaken by officers such as capital programme and treasury management, updates on collection funds, so that's basically collecting council tax and business rates, budget pressure reviews, and looking at inflation review. And then things that have happened much more latterly, so the provisional settlement, obviously that from the government, that came in quite late on the 19th of December. And so then we, with that in place, and then having some knowledge about what the settlement from government would be, we were then able to look at possibly the rises to council tax, which now has been proposed, and then uses of balances and reserves to help us plug that gap. And obviously we don't normally want to use our reserves to plug gaps because it's not a good use of reserves, but given the exceptional circumstances, there is a proposal in the budget, which I'm sure you've seen, to use £6.9 million to plug reserves, to plug gaps using reserves. In terms of what that core funding, provisional settlement core funding looked like, there was an increase in the social care grants. The reforms that we were expecting to adult social care have been delayed, and so there is short-term funding to fund that, to cover some of that demand in adults and children's services at the moment. There is an expectation from the government that we will raise council tax to the limits that they have set. So that is a general increase of 3% and a increase of 2% on the adult social care precept. And that is written into the government's expectations of what they expect us, how they expect us to be bringing in money to cover adult social care and other pressures. And there's a couple of slides in here that in the pack that just provide a bit of context for where we are in terms of looking at council tax and compared to government grants. So there's a slide that's got the pink and blue bars in it, which shows how central grants across local government have decreased over the last 10 years, and council tax has risen in order to meet some of that gap as well. So that's sort of the national picture. Looking at the London picture, We're not one of the highest council tax boroughs. We're not one of the lowest council tax boroughs. How much money councils can raise through council tax depends on the number of properties they have. So you'll see some of the inner London boroughs, have fewer properties, and also, of course, the value of those properties. And again, you'll see some of those boroughs have higher values, and some have lower, and that's reflected in the amount that is brought in through council tax. So we're sort of a little over a bit over to the left of that graph, but it's by no means at either end of it. If we do put up, if council tax, we decide at the council meeting to put up council tax by the amount proposed, then that will pay for adult social care through the precept. It will also help us to fund children's social care, and it will help us with to grow funding in the area of community safety, which we've identified as a particular area that needs growth. I won't dwell on business rates. They are set by the government. They, there's a formula. We collect them, we send money back, we retain some. In terms of fees and charges, so fees and charges are charged, are reviewed every year as part of the budget setting process. There are different types of fees and charges. So depending on what type they are, it depends on whether we aim for full cost recovery or whether we aim to make more or some that we subsidize. So it's all different. Where we aim for full cost recovery, then this generally has been increased in line with inflation at the time of the review. So that does mean that they may be going up by more this year because of that high rate of inflation. But they're also, that review will also pick up things where perhaps there are historical anomalies and try and pick up on those as well. So you will see some that are a bit out of line with that general inflationary rise. And then finally, in your packs, you've got a couple of slides on some ring-fenced accounts, or separate accounts rather, which are the HRA, Housing Revenue Account, and the Dedicated Schools Grant. So in terms of the HRA, then we obviously have our 30-year HRA business plan to maintain our housing stock and indeed build new housing for our tenants and local residents. Again, it's subject to similar inflationary pressures as the rest of the budgets. You will have noted that we agreed a 7% rent increase as set out again as recommended by the government in order to fund some of that. And then on the Dedicated Schools Grant, again, the formula again is set by the government, and we don't have any influence over that. We do set a budget for the high needs block, and that is in deficit because of the pressures on that particular area of spend. So that's my presentation of the report.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn, for that. Of course, we've invited some of the Cabinet as well. If I could just get a few words from each of the Cabinet profiles, please. Starting with Guy.
Thanks. Well, we've got a lot of pressures in the environmental service. There's a lot of fuel, and there's a lot of salaries. A lot of people who are on, a lot of them are on London Living Wage, and that's going up by, I think it's 8% in April. We've also had over the last year a lot of pressure on wages as well, particularly of HGV drivers, who, as you know, is an extremely competitive world. So in general, another thing that we have which is difficult is the inflation built into the Hounslow Highways contract, which is based on the contract as originally agreed many years ago, and it's based on RPIX, and that's going up by 12%. So that's better than most things. So we are looking to make savings in various places, but they're not dramatic. We've looked at some things which you might think make a dramatic difference. For example, some councils have gone on to 3 weekly house waste collection. It makes very little difference. It's I think it'll save about 100k, and for a lot of difference, because obviously most of our waste is collected weekly via the recycling. So that's sort of where we are, looking at lots of different savings, but some of them are, some of the bigger ones are more about changes in the way that we work. So we're looking to double the amount of food that we take. There's an awful lot of food that still goes into black bins, and if we get them out of the black bins, we save £100 a month basically on disposing of them. And that's a fairly big one. We're also looking at reducing bin maintenance. At the moment, we clean a lot of bins, and that's quite an expensive service. So we're looking at not doing that and just maintaining them. But that has obviously, like all things that we cut in the context of a council, if we cut stuff, then it's going to make life more challenging for the residents.
Thank you, Councillor Lambert.
Thank you.
Councillor Sampson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Leader has alluded to the housing pressures already, but I just want to add a few more bits into that. The budget pressure, 3.3 million in 22-23. Increased demand for temporary accommodation during the pandemic has not reduced as we'd hoped. This increased demand has been met through sourcing additional bed and breakfast, which is more expensive than other types of accommodation. In 2021 and 21-22, these additional costs were offset by salary underspends, COVID and other grant funding. This year's budget pressures will again be funded through COVID monies, retaining the reserve to mitigate pressure in the 23-24. A review is underway and a plan will be developed to address and manage this budget pressure over the medium term. And with fees and charges, in 23-24, service charges for the HRA residential tenants were approved by Cabinet in January. The following increase to general fund housing related charges are proposed. The traveller site charges 7% increase. That's in line with the social rent cap for the HRA. Surveyors' fees are currently set at 20% of the cost of the grant funded for adaptations. Link line, telecare, 7% increase in line with the social rent cap for HRA. But a review of the service is actually ongoing. Handyman scheme charges are not currently being applied. The service manager is reviewing the offer and looking at implementing a process to start charging users for that service. Fees to leaseholders are set based on actual costs incurred. So that won't change, that's going to stay the same. The housing revenue account, the council strategy for spending and borrowing to maintain its housing stock operates services for its tenants and leaseholders and design and build new council homes is set out in the 30-year HRA business plan, which went to Cabinet in January. In 22-23, the provision of HRA funded services is expected to generate a surplus of 9.6 million. This will be used to help fund the HRA capital programme, which includes substantial new build projects and an estate investment programme. In 23-24, 2 million will be transferred to the HRA reserves, again used to part fund the HRA capital programme. So that's sort of pretty much a bit more meat on the bone of what Catherine has already said. But yeah, we're not without our pressures, like all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor. If I could ask Councillor Girwal as well, please.
Thank you. I think we're all in the same boat with savings and pressures and everything. Our growth in especially in CARDA, children affected by domestic violence, that's where our growth is, because first the Home Office funding has ceased this vital work, and the proposal is to fund for a further 3 years, 510k per year. And this is in order to establish the true value and potential financial and social benefits. Indications are that they are significant, and the work focuses on specialist counselling for children affected by domestic violence and work with victims and perpetrators. On interim resources, 200k per year for 3 years. During the lockdown periods of the pandemic, the incidence of domestic violence increased by approximately 300%. COVID grant has funded additional resources, but the demand has not reduced to pre-pandemic levels. Therefore, we're looking to secure for a 3-year period 3.5 full-time members of staff. Some of the CARDA work requires additional costs for venue hire, equipment, and ad hoc associated costs. Savings in this portfolio, we are trying to find through licensing and reducing consultation requirements. We've discussed this with the chair of licensing, and given we consult over and above the statutory requirements, we can reduce this and save administration costs. Also, pest control, if we're thinking of getting an additional officer to increase income generation, because then they can carry on more PCN charges, as Councillor Dunn said. We're looking at the maximum fees in that. So that's about what's happening in the budget at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I would love to sort of speak to other cabinet members, of course. It's pretty much quite evident that it's kind of the same throughout all the other cabinet portfolios. We now sort of move to I mean, thank you all to cabinet. We're going to move to sort of questions to the cabinet and to any sort of member of cabinet that does want to answer. If I could first ask Councillor Foot, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, we've had the report from the members of the cabinet that are here. I'm conscious of the fact that there are senior members of the cabinet that have got much, the reports that would have impacted upon this that we've not been able to hear because they, for whatever reasons, are not able to come. Is it possible for us to have any written reports from those updating us what might be the case in their portfolios?
Yeah, I'll make sure you get those. And yeah, definitely. Apologies again. I think it's half term this week, which I think accounts for some of those missing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. So the question for me really is, so what impact on services do you foresee because of needing to fill the budget gap?
So for the budget gap that we're seeking to fill for 23 to 24, we haven't suggested any cuts to our frontline services. We're looking at trying to close the gap through those other measures that I've outlined in terms of reviews, looking at how we operate our services rather than what would actually impact on the front line. Obviously, going forward, we've got that cumulative gap that we will need to look at for future years.
Thank you. And Councillor Bowring, please.
This is a slightly different question because you've, I think, already covered the question that I was going to ask. But I'd like to just touch on that 6.9 million from reserves. Obviously, we've maintained healthy reserves. So it's great that we've got that to fall back on. You said it's not normal for reserves to plug the gap, which I agree with. And you said, but it is exceptional times, which I also agree with. So what I'd like to understand is a little bit more why that 6.9 million, why not more, why not less? Kind of how do we get to that figure? What was the sort of process and conversation there?
Well, so we've looked at trying to do what we can through the existing savings that programs that cabinet members were working on with their officer teams, and then all those other things that officers were able to look at around, you know, what can we do in terms of looking at the different pressures and the inflation and everything, and basically we come to, you know, what gap do we have, and we look at what's the sensible thing to do with council tax, and again, you know, it's we don't want to have to put up council tax, but it is an expectation of us, or we don't want to have to put it up by as much as we are, but by as much as we've proposed, but it is an expectation on us by government that we will, and that if we don't put it up by that amount that they are saying we can put it up by, that will then that could then have a negative effect in future, because they'll assume that we, you know, that we don't require that. But it's also a prudent position, you know, that council tax, if we don't put up council tax, then that is revenue that is lost, not only for this year, but for other years going forward. And that's what you need to do in order to maintain a healthy position. So we basically come to the position where we can get as far as we can with all those other measures, and looking at what would be sensible and okay to put in from reserves given the exceptional circumstances that we're in.
Yeah, thank you for that. Councillor Kiani, please. Do you want to, yeah, if you, Councillor Bowring, please. Yeah.
I just was wondering, are we looking at any staff reductions as a consequence of kind of reducing activity and sort of
reviews? So that may involve reducing or changing, which may then have an impact on staffing requirements. But at this point, I should say that no specific staffing reductions have been identified. So any impact of staffing reductions would depend on the current resourcing in areas that we were looking to change. That may not involve council staff, for example. You know, there are areas where we're using agency staff, and it could be that some of those agency posts are cut, so it doesn't have an effect on our on council staff. But wherever, you know, if there are changes proposed that would affect on staffing, then obviously at those points, then we would engage in appropriate consultations, you know, through the processes that we have in our policies in order to make sure that it was done in the appropriate way.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Councillor Bowring, yeah.
Sorry, it's the.
Yeah, so Sue's telling me housing, which is very much the case, and also the others that I mentioned previously, so adult social care, children's social care, and then there's other areas of financial pressure, such as contractual inflation. So some of our contracts, particularly the highways contract and social care providers, again, that's all big pressures on us.
Thank you for that. Okay, a question from me again. So how can we balance increased demand and tighten funding for some services?
Thanks. Less helpful intervention from Sue this time. Good luck with that, she says. So, I mean, obviously it is a challenging task to balance increased demand with the tightened funding situation. Challenging is kind of understating it really. So the gap has widened, and as we can see from this year's financial strategy outlook and from the budget setting process, you know, that there are those particular areas of pressure that like social care and SEND provision. We have to look at everything. You know, we're in a position where we have to look at everything. So there is a review underway looking at the adult social care reform and the children's model of care. So we're looking to see whether we can identify any further efficiencies that can be made in those areas. Obviously, those areas are areas of statutory provision. They're areas where we look after some of the most vulnerable people, some of the most vulnerable residents that we have in our borough. So again, we don't want to be looking at cutting frontline services if we can avoid it. And there are things we can't cut because it's a statutory service.
It's kind of a follow-up question. So from me again, it is really about where we do have our commitments for our Hounslow. Is there any areas that we can perhaps reprofile, allowing spending elsewhere perhaps, and then maybe in the future go back to the other spending?
Yeah, so some of that's an interesting thought. So some of those areas that can be reprofiled without having much impact on the services have been included in our short-term and temporary savings proposals, which have been put forward in the report, and we have actually put forward £1.25 million of temporary savings. So I think that's the sort of thing you're alluding to. Obviously, there are things that can't be reprofiled, and that's things like adult social care, children's social care, and housing, because that is very much that depends on the demand, and we can't put that off to later years, obviously.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Foote, please.
Yeah, can I talk about the council tax and in terms of what the government raising the levels? Are we whereabouts are we at that moment now? Will we be looking at the higher levels that have been made available? And secondly, if there are any other financial levers for the council to increase revenues, to look at that side, are we investigating that, and have we come up with any answers there?
Okay, so to start with council tax, so we have published our the budget report that will be going to cabinet next week, and then on to borough council. So the proposal in there is to raise council tax by that amount that is put forward and expected by government. So the maximum amount that we can do without having a referendum. So that we are, we're using that to its sort of maximum. In terms of other levers, there is actually very little that we can draw on. So there are business rates, of course, and they are set by national government. The council collects the income, and then again it's redistributed according to a government formula. So we get to keep some of that, and some of it goes back to government and other places. Fees and charges is something that we have the ability to set ourselves, and as I've mentioned, we are reviewing that. We do review that annually. that again, so those proposed rises to fees and charges are included with the budget papers. Some of them are statutory, some of them are obviously not. There's some flexibility and there, but we have to think of our residents as well. We are already proposing a council tax rise, where many fees and charges are going up. We do have to think of people's ability to pay, and that will affect the level to which we think it prudent to put them up.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kamran, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in terms of budget targets. What choices and options did Council have when setting up budget targets, and how were decisions made in order to decide between options? Thank you.
So in terms of closing the budget gap that we have for 23-24, then every cabinet member was tasked with looking at their areas and what how they could look for those short-term, perhaps temporary savings, things that weren't going to have much of a big effect on services. So there was no area that wasn't looked at, and there was any area where there's a requirement for growth, that had to be put forward and looked at very carefully. But basically, there's no stone left unturned in terms of meeting that target. But then we've got a much bigger target to meet next time. So again, we're going to have to look at everything again. Obviously, we need to bear in mind our statutory requirements and also our priorities as a council and our ambitions, and that will shape where and how we look for savings.
Thank you. Councillor Biddulph, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a finance boffin, as everyone knows, but I can't help being anything other than extremely alarmed by the cumulative gap and the lack of income coming in to meet it. I'm here ready to look at it from the perspective of our residents and business ratepayers, and they're busy turning down their thermostats, reducing the number of hours they have the heating on, sleeping under and wearing more layers. Businesses are closing 2 or 3 days a week to avoid costs if they're not going to have enough customers coming through the door. And I don't get any real sense that the council, that this budget is trimming anything in the way that our residents are trimming. You said you're looking at it, but my understanding is that you should go into the budget process with a budget that balances, and this doesn't balance. There's a huge gap. I'm really concerned about that, particularly in the context of what residents are expecting, which is better services. Very disappointed with some of them this year. Fees and charges are up, you've said that. Council tax is going up, you've said that. Social rents are going up. It's all other people's money that's going up. And I don't have a sense that there is anything being done to this budget to trim back things that don't need to be spent on.
Please,
There's a huge amount of increase in staff since I was first elected in 2018, and I haven't heard anything about that. And I don't really understand the food waste point, Guy. £100 a month, is that total? And the question is, what is the council doing to identify trimming that can be done so that the cumulative gap isn't so large? It's a perfectly allowable question for a scrutiny member to make.
So what are we doing to trim?
Yes,
to close the fund?
I've heard about everybody else having to pay more. I haven't heard anything about us trimming what we are doing to meet the financial reality.
So every cabinet member with their teams is looking and identifying where we can spend less. What we're doing for this year is we're not looking at cutting any frontline services. So we are looking at where we can trim that fat, or to make things more streamlined, to make it more efficient. The gap is huge, and ongoing the gap gets bigger, and we will have to look at more and more difficult decisions as time goes on.
Chair, we're supposed to go into the budget debate with a balanced budget, and we're not doing that this year. I'm just really surprised and disappointed that we haven't looked at that before putting the budget forward. We should go in having looked at where the cuts can be made.
Well,
where
we
the
have.
changes-
We've presented a balanced budget that's going to cabinet next week and going to council at the end of the month.
But it's a budget with a cumulative gap.
No, we've set out how we've closed that gap.
There's
But
still
it
going to
does
be a
involve
gap. but it's gonna be
that's what we're
closed.
talking about. So the council tax rise, the use of reserves, the reprofiling of the service reviews.
Okay, well, there isn't much here to be presented, which the public will be looking at, that makes it clear what has been done to make those points. It is questions, but also you have to have a chance.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So will you be producing that for the budget at Borough Council?
So that is set out in the budget report, Councillor Biddulph.
Thank you. Councillor Kiani, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We are reducing some services. Are we suggesting to reduce staff to alleviate financial pressure?
At this point in time, we don't have any proposals that mean a reduction in staff. If that were to happen, then we would go through the procedures that are in place.
Thank you. Councillor Perisotto, please.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you mentioned how the percentage by which we're increasing the council tax and other services generally needs to consider how people are going to be able to afford that. Have we been able to have a type of prediction of perhaps how many people will not be able to afford those increases and how that will then affect how much money we are taking in the future?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have generally good record on council tax collection. So basically the amount that we manage to collect that is owed. We know that some people do struggle with paying council tax, and that is why we have and are retaining one of the most generous schemes in the country for council tax support for some of the poorest people in our borough, and those who are the least worst off in our borough will continue to pay zero council tax. Obviously, for other people, it is going to go up, and we don't underestimate the fact that may cause difficulties for some people. Like always, anyone who's having difficulties paying their council tax, we would urge them to contact the council at the earliest point possible, so we can look at whether there is any other support that we can put in place for them, whether there are other benefits and things that they may be entitled to that they could be claiming, or if there's any kind of short-term support that we could put in place for those people. And then, of course, we can help them by putting in place payment plans and things if necessary.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor. Great support mechanisms we do have indeed. Councillor Tuck, please.
Thank you, Chair. A silly question probably been answered, but I'm slightly thick-headed. So the cumulative gap which has been mentioned and the proposed actions which you are mentioning in budget, does that mean after implementing those proposed solutions, we'll have zero cumulative gap?
So the current gap would be zero for 23-24, yes.
Thank you. Yep. And Councillor Perisotto again, please. Yeah.
Thank you again. Councillor Dunn, I think this one particular to your environment portfolio. Will this have any impact on our target to reach net zero and other climate goals that we have?
So our target to reach net zero was always incredibly ambitious, and we went into it in some respects, knowing that we didn't have funding that would cover everything. We have very talented teams who are very good at bidding for funding for specific projects. It is not a mechanism of funding that I like or think is right. We end up bidding against other authorities that need to reduce their carbon footprint just as much as we do if the UK is to reach its goals in this area. So it remains a considerable challenge. We are, so in March, I will be bringing a business case for a new investment model to Cabinet that involves investment from private sector sources as well. We think this is necessary in order to bring in the investment into our borough that we will need in order to reach net zero. So we don't expect to do it all through government grants.
Thank you, Councillor. Now we do sort of move into the discussion phase, so all the questions have been asked. So we do have a bit of time to talk about the budget. Firstly, Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a bit about the question that you asked. We are targeting a 250k improvement in the income from wood recycling. And it's worth mentioning that because we won't do that. The residents will do that. We have a communication thing coming up very shortly, which will encourage people to do that, because it's not only does it save money, it also saves gases, because food produces a lot of gas, and it's the kind of, it's the sort of thing that we can do which doesn't damage anybody's budget, and it helps ours. So that's one in particular that we're trying to do. Equally, during this year, we've started a business doing commercial waste collection. That's been very successful. This year it's been loss-making because it hasn't got the. Next year we're hoping it'll start make a profit. Again, councillors can help with that by talking to their local businesses and encourage them to. It's difficult in Chiswick because the service is actually quite economical in Chiswick, but in the rest of the council, it's the borough, it's easier to get new customers. But the quality is better, but obviously the cost is a bit better because we pay people properly. So I wanted to make that point. There are things that we could do as councillors and officers of the council to actually help this budget to work better. And I think we don't do enough of that, and we should do some more.
Just to make 2 points, I've been trying very hard to sell the commercial waste service in Chiswick. I do think it's a good thing, and I accept totally that you've got to have more people.
It has another benefit, of course, there's less left on the street.
Yeah. And if, my dream is for several in a row to be done at the same time, so you get several customers. I was really shocked with staying out with a friend the other day who said she doesn't recycle a thing. And I thought she was like me and recycles everything that she possibly can. And she said she had no idea that it was a source of income for the council. And I just wonder if it's worth promoting that to people. The more you throw away, the less we get. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, brilliant. Thank you.
Yes, I think we should.
Thank you, councillors. So really what I want us to just talk about is the collective, not doing or going through cabinet profiles individually. That's not what we're here for. So it's overview of complete sort of finances of the council. So We want to, of course, move to an area where the gap or the funding gap is reduced. And I think, the finance team have done a fantastic job, and making sure that services are still there. So we're having the services for all our residents up and down, and we're not skimming on it. We're not sort of losing them. We're not reducing them. So this is really a very good. Even so, it's quite. When you hear it, it's quite a dim view that we've got a bit of a gap in finance, but we're doing the best as we can do to uphold all the services. And I think, despite everything, it's a very, very good budget. I think there are areas that we can certainly look into in closing the gap, but I don't think we have to sacrifice any services, and I certainly don't want to do that for any of our residents in London Borough Housing. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Chair, maybe it will be a good idea to keep a close eye on the new ideas or improvements being made in different departments, or the tactics that's being used to reduce cost, and have a report at a later date to the scrutiny, like what's been done and what sort of savings has been made.
Yeah, very, very good point. I mean, we can certainly, I mean, this sort of happens every year. So we get a budget and we say, yep, thank you very much for the next year. So we can certainly get an update. I'm sure we do, where we can get a half-year update of finance from the financial teams. But yeah, we can know it.
I wasn't saying about the regular update, specific points which we are targeting to reduce cost. Any update like on those specific actions, what we achieved?
So again, I don't want us to go into each cabinet profile. I want us to overview the entire lot. So not just saying, oh, we're going to stop here or we're going to reduce this. So it's giving us a broad understanding overall the finances for the council. Is that all right? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Councillor Barry.
Yeah, Chair, it's my opinion that it's making safe. So we're sort of taking out 4 or 5% for this year's shortfall, which to me seems a kind of a reasonable. We're not sort of raiding the piggy bank. I mean, obviously we can't draw from the reserves every single year. That's unsustainable. But it seems like it's been, the big picture has been it's sort of a balancing act of these three things, and it's my opinion, it's a pretty good job.
I think so. I mean, it's to try and sort of balance it, and that's the sort of key figure is the balancing of using the savings effectively, which are the reserves, with the costs going up. Yes, we can mitigate some of those costs by increasing fees and rents in line with inflation around that sort of 10% mark. But if we don't, that gap is going to be even bigger. And instead of having a £43 million deficit, we'll have a £100 million deficit. We'll lose reserves within a year or two at most. So it has to be done. Yeah, Councillor Perez-Ortega.
Thank you. I just want to raise, of course, given how things will change, it does raise some anxiety about not cutting services because they are the ones that those that are structurally disadvantaged is approved.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bidoffice, yeah.
Thanks. A slight note of disagreement, I'm afraid, from me, because I don't think we should be relying on increasing costs to our residents, and that's almost exclusively what we've heard about tonight. We haven't had much detail on the other points, and I think putting up rents in particular for people in social housing is going to be very difficult for them when they're already struggling to pay their heating bills and food bills, etc. So I would like to distance myself from the more positive comments that have been made.
Councillor Dunn, please.
Thanks. Yeah, just on that point, I mean, we do know that most people in social housing, their rents will be covered by the housing benefit. There are obviously a small number for who that is not the case, but again, we do have support measures in place that we can help them with, and we would urge anyone who is struggling to pay their rent to let us know at the earliest opportunity.
Councillor Foot, please. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's. We should also note that we sat here as a council, and the government has been very slow in coming forward with what they want to know. It's all last minute stuff where we're not getting numbers from the government. None of any money that was forthcoming is mentioned until the last minute. Now, those are circumstances, and Councillor Biddulph cannot ignore that when she's saying she's distancing herself.
Councillor Sampson, please.
I have a seat at the London councils, and all the London councils, including us, repeatedly ask for an earlier settlement, and we keep banging on about it because we must have it, because it can't, as Councillor Foot said, we can't have it last minute, and it happens every year. We're asking for a settlement, even if they gave us 4 years, at least then we can plan ahead and we can manage things a lot better than last minute than what we're doing at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor.
Just for the record, I just also want to add a note of thanks to local third sector organizations that have been stepping up to support the delivery of various different services, such as Hounslow Food Box. As chair of the Children and Young People panel, I know of many organizations that are supporting unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and just generally refugee families in Hounslow due to our services being so constrained and not having that financial and structural support from central government.
Thank you. Councillor Biddulph.
Thank you. Just to say that late settlements are not good. And we had a motion recently, which I think was talked out or whatever it was at Borough Council, where we would have voted in favour of a 5-year settlement plan so that we would have known 5 years in advance. So don't think that we don't agree with that. The point is there's a lack of money.
Thank you, Councillor Biddulph. Sorry, Councillor Cameron. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to raise one concern regarding the reduction of park rangers. Is the residents, they are raising concerns and they are not happy with if this service is being reduced. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is quite a tricky sort of subject for everyone, and I do appreciate that. We've got a cost of living crisis going on as well. Look, Housing Council is one of the most generous councils there to give support packages for people in need. So, and we will, and we've got a lot of sort of charity organisations out there as well, where residents can sort of reach out and ask for help, but just ask for help. Just get those residents to call up and give us a call.
Can I just say, I have spoken to the leader, and he is going to discuss with those members that have raised these points about the park rangers within the next week or so.
Councillor Sampson.
I'd just like to come in on the point that you've raised there about the park rangers. We are looking, Ajmi, sorry, I've butted in, you could have said this, but we are looking at we know that they offer a very good service. We know they're important. We fully understand that, but there is a complete review of enforcement at the moment, and we're looking at how that fits, if it will fit, on how we can do things differently. Again, it's all back to cost savings and so on. So, but that's what we're looking at. But it's not that we're, it's still on the table. It's not that they're being taken off the table. It's not.
Thank you, Councillor Sampson. Councillor Dunn, please.
Yeah, so I mean, when our budget gap did increase dramatically, one of the decisions we did make was that there would be we could not have growth in particular directorates, and that then did affect the park rangers service and plans for that. So that is one of those examples of the tough decisions and reductions that we are making.
Thank you for that, Councillor Dunn. Okay, so I'm going to pass to Councillor Foot to kind of summarise the budget. If there is any other sort of question or discussions, then off to Councillor Foot.
I'm not quite sure how I can summarise everything that's gone on here. But I think that we certainly have covered a wide range here of what. Sorry, I'm not reading my notes. Right, but yeah. Right, I think we've had a debate. We've not identified those areas that have changed in the financial strategy since November, and the last minute changes that have been put upon us, and we're all aware of that. I think there's really not much more than I can say there. I think that we note that what the cabinet members have said. I'm sorry that that there weren't other representatives from the cabinet that were here, because there were there's specific points that we could have asked. But okay, there's circumstances one that have not allowed that. But under the circumstances, yeah, I move acceptance, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Foot. Councillor Bowring, please. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I do just want to say one or two things. So we cannot influence cabinet or the budget or the finance. The only thing we can sort of say and reach out as councillors is just trying to say to the cabinet members to try and keep the services there, but reduce that funding gap. That is kind of the only thing we can sort of say to you as OSC. But it's of course down to you as cabinet and as leaders of the council. But thank you all for being here. But that sort of ends the budget agenda. Yeah. Okay. You're more than welcome to stay or go if you want to go. It's up to you. Can we have a break? It's all, yeah. We won't be able to, but I'm happy for you to take Councillor Bid off. We'll sort of wait. Okay, we'll sort of move on to agenda item number 5. So this is updates from scrutiny panels and a North West London Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So OSC will now we have these 3 scrutiny panels working across the year. All 3 panels have now met at least twice, and I'd like to ask each panel chair to provide a short update on their work thus far. If I can ask firstly Councillor Kiani to provide a update, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to say that our second meeting of Housing and Environment Scrutiny Panel held on 12th of December. In that meeting, Peter Matthew and his team, Victoria Lawson and her team, and Robert Meldrum from Finance, and special guest Craig Cooper and team from Qualo attended. The discussion evolved in Qualo's performance metrics, um, repair process. We understood the repair process. We discussed and understood void process, consumer satisfaction. And the biggest question was under discussion, how the high satisfaction rate achieved. And this was the discussion in that meeting. Our next meeting is going to be on 6th of March, 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Ghani. Councillor Sharma, please, on health and adult care scrutiny panel, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The Health and Adult Care Scrutiny Panel met for its second meeting on the 16th of November 22, where it considered a presentation from the lead member on dementia care services in the community. In addition, the panel looked at the work to develop dementia-friendly Hounslow and engage with carers and people with dementia. Since then, small groups of counsellors have visited Dementia CAF, the Singing for the Brain, and also the Dementia Voice Group. I also met with Age UK and Health Watch Hounslow. Visits are planned to Age UK, and there will be a discussion with social workers and practitioners providing end-of-life support for people with dementia. The next meeting will be on the 22nd of February, and we will be considering the pathway from diagnosis to care, as well as the findings from the carers listening sessions that we've held.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And Councillor Pirizotto, please.
Thank you. We've had our third meeting on Monday of the Children and Young People panel. And just before the meeting in person, we had a few online meetings. Thank you to Councillor Sharma for joining that. We had a conversation with the children's services in Wrexham, who have been judged as been given a green status for their support in identifying children from an European background and applying for and obtaining EU settlement scheme. So we've just learned a bit from them and have used those learnings in our previous meeting on Monday, where we had officers from our children's services talking to us about how we are ourselves identifying children with immigration status needs that are coming into our care and making sure that by the time that they leave our care, they've got the most secure status possible, or that they are informed on how to continue pursuing that. We also had an interesting conversation with some organizations, again, in the third sector that are visiting the hotels where asylum-seeking families are staying here in Hounslow and how they are supporting families there, either by food provision or general activities, because as we know, these hotels are generally not nice places to live. So again, really grateful for these organizations. We heard from Care for Calais, Humans for Rights Network, and Afghanistan and Central Asian Association. I'm really grateful for the work that they do. And now we're going to have a few more online meetings before our fourth and final meeting to continue identifying how specifically unaccompanied asylum-seeking children are being educated in our borough, some even through virtual schools. The final meeting will be on the 27th of March, where we're going to present our final report.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. That's great work. Really, I do need to just go back to Councillor Sharma to give us an insight on the North West London Joint Health over in Scrutiny Committee as well, please.
Thank you, Chair. I represented Hounslow at the third Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, hosted by the London Borough of Kensington and Chelsea on the 7th of December 22. The committee discussed the elective recovery and cancer care backlog and the impact the COVID pandemic had upon residents of North West London and hospitals. The committee welcomed the recovery plan for tackling the COVID-19 backlog by increasing staff capacity, increasing appointment targets, and increasing the number of weekend clinics. The committee reviewed the winter planning report and the winter funding for the NHS. They raised concerns surrounding hospital bed capacity, staff retention numbers, and an increase in the number of children contracting scarlet fever and presenting themselves in A&E. This was like the strep. The committee were reassured that the North West London would implement additional acute and critical care beds for winter. In addition, there are programmes aimed at filling vacancies and providing mental health support to staff. The committee discussed the North West London workforce strategy, which highlighted that staff retention figures have not recovered since 2019. The workforce strategy will aim to make North West London a great place to work and transform the work to meet future needs. The committee raised concerns regarding the increase in people leaving the NHS, but the committee were reassured that there are plans in place to drive recruitment, provide better job security and support staff and enable more job flexibility.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Sharma. Should the committee members want to understand more, I'm sure Councillor Kiani, Perisotto and Sharma will be more than happy to provide further details outside of this meeting or indeed emails. So do kind of reach out. So again, thank you all so much for this. So we do actually move on to agenda item number 6, which is the work programme. So we developed a work programme in July of last year and agreed it at our September meeting. We must keep that document under review and based on discussions at our last meeting, OSC members will note that we now have an item looking at housing associations scheduled in for May meeting. The areas that the committee think are now worth your inclusion that weren't captured when we agreed the work programme, we can certainly talk about that now, and then we can sort of add it into a plan if need be. But our time is finite. Is there anything else that you want to add to the work programme?
All I can say is that I welcome.
I agree, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah. But is there anything else that we want to add or look into, despite everything that is sort of developing in the last few months? No. Brilliant. Okay, so we will continue with the work programme. Thank you.
Sorry, there were just some outstanding items which are in the minutes, including, I don't know, perhaps Councillor Foote doesn't want it anymore, but a visit to Hanworth because it's under-resourced.
Yes, it's for us to visit Hanworth Ward.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll. Yep. So we'll be in the May meeting. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, that's brilliant. So yeah, we'll add the Hanworth walk in the May meeting as well. So yeah, that'd be a nice, fun day out, wouldn't it? Hopefully the weather's good. Okay.
Can't guarantee it. Boy.
Can't guarantee it. No, not at all. Okay, so agenda item number 7 is any sort of urgent business. No. Okay, and agenda item number 8 is date of next meeting of 7th of March, 2023. Again, I'll thank you all for being here, and hopefully this was a nice sort of healthy discussion. But thank you all, and see you in the next meeting. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Chair.